This session, ladies and gentlemen, we have our keynote speaker, the Honorable Bill Johnston, MLA, Minister for Mines and Petroleum, Energy and Industrial Relations, Government of Western Australia. Here we go.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak with you today. And I'm coming here from Perth in Western Australia. And I begin by letting you know that I'm speaking to you from the traditional lands of the Noongar people, the Indigenous people for our region in Western Australia. And I want to acknowledge the many special guests that have been attending today, including the senior representatives of the Government of Singapore. Western Australia is at a very exciting time for clean energy transition, and I'm pleased to be able to talk to you about how we're working to create our low carbon energy future together. Western Australia is experiencing a rapid energy transformation, which brings exciting opportunities for decarbonisation of our energy sector, but also many challenges. Around 1 in 3 households have solar panels, and even through COVID-19, this take-up has not slowed. By 2030, we expect 1 in 2 households in Western Australia to have solar panels. When large and small-scale renewable energy are intermittent and unable to be seen and managed by the system operators, they present challenge to maintaining the power system's security, reliability and affordability. This is particularly true for Western Australia's main grid, the South West Interconnected System. This system covers an enormous area with a very low density of customers outside the Perth metropolitan area and a grid islanded from the rest of the country. To manage these challenges and to continue to transition to clean and distributed energy resources, I announced the Energy Transformation Strategy last year. The strategy, which is led by the Energy Transformation Task Force, will lay the groundwork for secure, reliable, sustainable and affordable electricity for Western Australia for years to come. Under the strategy, in April this year, I released the Distributed Energy Resources Roadmap. The roadmap recommends 36 actions to maximise the benefits of solar panels, batteries, electric vehicles, and other small-scale devices that will continue to be installed across our communities. We've already begun implementing these recommendations. For example, we've deployed community batteries to alleviate network constraints. These batteries can be used by the local community to store excess energy from the rooftop panels. This would be a more cost-effective measure by not just paying for the virtual storage, rather than by installing their own batteries. Just a fortnight ago, we achieved another important milestone in the strategy with the release of the Whole of System Plan. The Whole of System Plan, or WASP for short, includes extensive modelling to guide the investments in energy policies the state government needs over the coming decade. At present, 20% of our energy comes from renewable generation, and this is expected to at least triple over the next 20 years. Under all the scenarios we modelled, we're going to have more wind capacity connected to the grid. Rooftop solar will continue to be installed at an enormous rate, which will dampen investment in its direct competitor, large-scale solar. All these extra renewables means emissions are heading in the right direction, with carbon emissions declining over the next 20 years under all scenarios. One of the most exciting findings from the WASP is that energy storage will play a huge part in our energy future. The WASP modelling suggests large-scale batteries will be vital in harnessing the energy we generate and making it accessible when we need it, which in turn offsets the need for expensive network augmentation. We're currently talking to potential industry partners about our first large transmission-connected 100 megawatt big battery project. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the West Australian Government's priority is progressing energy initiatives that support our economic recovery, create jobs and reduce energy costs. As part of the COVID-19 recovery plan, in July this year, we announced a $66 million renewable energy package, including the installation of an additional 50 standalone power systems, the installation of battery energy storage systems in 9 regional communities, and energy infrastructure upgrades in remote Aboriginal communities. This will allow regional Western Australians to enjoy the benefit of rooftop solar and improve power quality in these local remote communities. We've also announced the installation of solar panels in up to 60 bus and rail stations across the Perth metropolitan area. We're installing solar panels on public housing properties. This will help reduce the energy bills and cost of living pressures for these low-income families for many years to come, and at the same time, reduce our energy footprint. We're also spending $4 million to install batteries and rooftop solar systems in 10 schools as a trial of a virtual power plant across our southwest system. This has allowed schools to reduce their energy footprint and decrease their energy bills. We understand it's important to continue to develop renewable energy technologies as we seek to reduce energy costs and meet our aspiration of net zero emissions by 2050. That's why in April we established the Clean Energy Future Fund, which has provided $9 million of seed funding for innovative clean energy projects. As part of our COVID-19 recovery plan, we've invested a further $10 million into this fund. Just over a year ago, we released the Western Australian Renewable Hydrogen Strategy, which charts the course for our state to become a world leader in renewable hydrogen production, use and export. The strategy prioritised 4 strategic focus areas for government and industry. Those focus areas are export, remote applications, hydrogen blending in natural gas networks, and transport. 9 initiatives worth $22 million have been committed to fuel WA's hydrogen industry and create jobs as part of the COVID-19 recovery plan. The national government is also making commitments to the hydrogen industry. WA is an ideal location for hydrogen projects. We have outstanding renewable energy resources, enormous areas of land, a highly skilled workforce, and the required export infrastructure. The Asian Renewable Energy Hub is a project in the state's north, which is being facilitated by the state government. It has the aim of supplying the energy needs of Asian economies like Singapore using the immense wind and solar resource that exists in north of the West of Australia. We still have a long way to go in our energy transition, but the Distributed Energy Resources Roadmap and the Whole System Plan are major milestones soon to be followed by the wholesale electricity market design and new governance arrangements. Western Australia has the clean energy resources, including battery materials and soft resources, such as expertise in off-grid applications and standalone power systems, to support not only a flourishing renewable energy and low emission technologies here in Western Australia, but for our global partners as well. We want to be a genuine partner for Asian economies during this important transition to a lower emission future. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to such a distinguished group of panelists. I apologize for not being able to join everyone in real time today, but I really wanted to be a part of this important panel in any way that I could. It is hard to overstate the importance of decarbonization in the energy sector and the complex issues that it raises for regulators, investors, and consumers. However, I truly believe that the appetite to decarbonize exists on all fronts, Technologies are evolving to meet that demand, and regulators are taking definitive actions to enable the grid of the future. Globally, carbon-intensive means of generation are steadily being replaced by cleaner sources of energy as the use of natural gas continues to grow and emerging technologies make greater gains in our regulated markets. As a regulator, I see an all-of-the-above approach to decarbonization as essential to ensuring we can really decarbonize our grid at a reasonable cost to the consumer. Here in the United States, natural gas continues to play a pivotal role in our energy transition. It is a reliable and affordable source of energy that has already displaced many carbon-intensive generators here in the U.S., and it has the potential to have a really positive impact on global carbon emissions as countries are starting to take advantage of the availability of LNG to facilitate their own energy transitions. An essential component to facilitating the use of natural gas is creating a regulatory environment that fosters investment in infrastructure by providing regulatory certainty, and one that facilitates the development of truly competitive gas markets and the attendant consumer benefits they bring. Likewise, competitive electricity markets and their attendant mechanisms are also essential to providing low-carbon energy to consumers at a reasonable cost. We recently held a technical conference to examine the role of carbon pricing in regulated wholesale markets. Although we are still examining the long-term implications of what we learned, an immediate takeaway is the consensus around utilizing market-oriented solutions. Carbon pricing is a transparent, efficient tool for addressing emissions that can enhance competition, help facilitate financing, and reduce investor uncertainty, and that is something we will be taking a hard look at moving forward. We also need to be mindful that grid investments will be a necessary component of the transition to a lower carbon future. Transmission infrastructure is an essential component of efficiently integrating and growing the number of renewables into our grid. We need to continually examine our return on equity policies to ensure they better reflect investor expectations and have the legal durability to stand up to challenges and provide investors the certainty and stability that they seek. We also need to evaluate how we incentivize transmission and focus on those projects that stand to provide the greatest benefits to consumers. On the emerging technologies front, continually looking to the horizon and taking regulatory actions that support the entry of new technologies into the markets will allow us to take full advantage of the benefits that these technologies have the potential to provide. In my tenure as chairman, we have taken significant steps to allow emerging technologies to participate in our regulated markets. Early in my tenure, we issued an order removing market barriers to the participation of storage resources, and more recently, we also took the seminal step of removing market barriers to the participation of aggregators of distributed energy resources. The participation of storage and distributed energy resources has the potential to reduce the need for expensive transmission upgrades, bringing flexibility and reliability to the grid and allowing renewables to better compete in the marketplace. Together, these actions have an incredible amount of transformative potential and will, in hindsight, be viewed as the most important acts we can take as regulators to reduce carbon emissions and ensure a smooth transition to a clean energy future. I again want to thank you all for allowing me to participate in this important panel today and for engaging on such an important issue. I really miss the opportunities to engage with you all in person, and I hope that my international colleagues, and with all of my international colleagues, and I look forward to the opportunity to engage face-to-face, hopefully, in the near future.
Move on straight to the next panel discussion. And of course, moderating this is Mr. Valentin de Miguel. You've seen him earlier on. Enjoy this session, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks very much, Rabi, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thanks very much for joining us in this fantastic session that we have now. And my congratulations to the organizers for managing to put together such an impressive collection of panelists that I have the honor to join today, and that I will introduce as we go through the questions. The questions and the topic for the session is low carbon innovation. And I think it's a brilliant topic because it is now clear to all of us that that low carbon journey is not a point of the if, it's a point on the how. And on the how, we need to ponder a number of elements like tackling the energy trilemma of security, sustainability, affordability. It's obviously to be tackled in the context of COVID-19. Different approaches in different countries, depending on whether countries are commodity rich or not, growing in the demand or not, energy demand or not, a number of elements that need to be pondered, but very notably, it's facilitated by innovation. And that's our topic today. And on that, let me right straight to the questions, and I will invite some of you distinguished panelists to provide insightful but snackable comments given time constraint, please. And the first question being, how will innovations in this space of technology, design, business models help us achieve the low carbon future? And let me invite Joseph McMonigal, who is Secretary General of International Energy Forum, who is joining us remotely. Joseph.
Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're watching or participating. It's great to be with you. As the new Secretary General of the IEF, I've only been on the job 3 months, so I'm catching up to all these great conferences and trying to learn a lot. And I look forward to learning from both the panel today and the other speakers at this conference. So thank you again for having me. To address, I think your question, Valentin, I think what I'd like to focus on are two things really. One is the recent G20 energy ministers meeting that was hosted by the presidency of Saudi Arabia, a virtual meeting, but all of the G20 energy ministers and a few other invited ministers and guests attended. And at that meeting, and actually in the communique, the ministers endorsed the concept of a carbon circular economy. And this is a sort of a alternate whole systems net zero approach to addressing climate change and reducing emissions. Similar to a Green New Deal type of approach. And the carbon circular economy approach really looks at 4 different areas: reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove. And there's some of these things we do already quite well, but other areas require a lot of technology advancement. And I think one of the significant parts of CCE is it's really being sponsored and promoted, I think, by Saudi Arabia. And I think, at least in talking to different colleagues at other international organizations and even at the UN Climate Secretariat, I think they view this as a pretty pivotal development. The fact that Saudi Arabia would be putting a lot of money into things like carbon sequestration, research and development, and commercial deployment. And so I think, up until now, it's really been the US and a few other, maybe Australia and a few other countries that have really invested in this sector. But frankly, it's going to be required for us to meet our goals, and it requires a lot more investment than currently exists. Secondly, I don't want to take up all my time in this first shot here, but I also want to mention the work that Keisuke Satomori and his colleagues at the IEA did in a recent report on technology. And essentially, the message was half of the technologies that we need to meet our climate goals are not even invented yet. And this is really a call to action for all of the scientists and researchers and entrepreneurs. We need you. We need you, and we need these new technologies to be created because the problem is urgent. Certainly, the energy transition is inevitable, but in order for us to meet our goals, we have a lot more work to do. And so those would be the key messages I would leave. But I don't want to take all of the time up here, so I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks a lot, Joe. And let me now call Satomori-san, Director of the Office for Energy Markets and Security at the International Energy Agency, on the same topic, please. Satomori-san.
Thank you, and thank you for including the IEA. Let me elaborate on what Mr. McMonigal pointed out in our findings of the Energy Technology Perspectives 2020. So to achieve a low carbon future, in particular to reach net zero either by 2070 or even earlier 2050, the new technologies and innovation must play a very big role. In the IEA's sustainable development scenario, well, actually 1/3 of the emission savings required for reaching net zero emissions by 2070 come from technologies that are not yet commercially yet today. And then ETP analyzed the faster innovation case to see what extent of the innovation would be needed for reaching the net zero emissions by 2050. The result is that almost half of all emission savings would need to come from technologies that are not yet commercially available today, just as Mr. McMonigal stated. And this may sound counterintuitive when we are used to hearing the success stories that we have seen with renewables, batteries, or the news about the hydrogen-based steelmaking, new electric, or the hydrogen trucks. But the truth is that these are often technologies that still require a whole lot more innovation. They are today at prototype or the demonstration stage. And so the question whether or not we can decarbonize sectors like long-distance transport or heavy industries very much depend on the pace at which these technologies can be improved, brought to the market, and scaled up. In the long-distance transport and heavy industry sector in particular, it's actually about 3/4, 75% of all emission savings to reach net zero emissions by 2050 required come from technologies that are at the pre-commercial level, not available yet today. So you can see the degree that we need to rely on premature technologies and a very big role of innovation to solve this situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Satomori-san. And joining us here on the stage, Professor Andy Hoare, Deputy Chief Executive for Research at the Agency for Science, Technology and Research. So how these innovations can help us achieve the low carbon economy.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think this is an enormous challenge for you and for us and for everybody in the world. So when you have such a major challenge, I think this is where the innovations have to come and play a very key role. The Singapore experience is quite clear. Number one, this is where the full system have to come together and the cross-organizational collaborations and cooperations becomes the key. I'll give you examples later on. The second is that not only within Singapore, but also working with the international community. And this is another thing that I think Singapore has learned a lot over the years. Give you an example. If you look at this challenge, And we also look at it at a macro and a micro level. In a macro level, what I mean is that you have to look at, for example, a town design. How do you design a green city? How do you design a green field, for example? And this is why, for example, we have the integrated environmental modeler working with our Housing Development Board, working with our Geelong Town Council in order to develop green cities and green town. This is number one. Number two is that you also do a techno-social analysis on a full cost analysis of what it means to have a hydrogen economy for Singapore, for example. Then at the technology level, and we have talked enough about the hydrogen innovation, and if you look at the CCUS, the carbon capture, utilization, and storage, you have enormous challenge. You have, certain commercial solutions and providers, but you will also realize that there are still some very immature technologies. And this is why when we are talking about carbon dioxide to fuels, carbon dioxide to chemicals, for example, this created enormous research opportunities for all of us. And this is also why we're investing heavily in the CCUS technology. So with that as a perspective, that also brings to electrification, for example. What do we mean by electrifications? Apart from electric vehicles, what do you need by batteries? What do you need by engines? What do you mean by energy conversion? And all these create enormous opportunities. And this is why I feel that international collaborations become so important in our R&D sector. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Professor. I'm delighted to introduce Martin Houston. Martin is Vice Chairman of Tellurian, Inc. And Martin, could you please share with us your view on what are the drivers for low-carbon technology innovation, please?
Thank you, Valentin. Good morning, everybody. Look, the need for cleaner air has never been more important. Population is rising. We've got a big and important challenges ahead of us. But I think we have to look at this through the global lens and not just the OECD or G20 or developed world lens. Many people do not have access to clean fuel across the globe. So it's important that we balance, as Valentin said in his introductory remarks, cost, security of supply, availability of supply, as well as the low carbon and environmental considerations. And there are lots of things driving low carbon, but it's not going at one speed. It's multi-speed and it varies from region to region. Political will, regulation, reduced access to capital in my sector, in the oil and gas sector, in the hydrocarbon sector, societal pressure, investor sentiments. But the key point is it is the right thing to do. And I would say that change has been driven more by the behavior of the 7 to 8 billion consumers than it is by diktats. But I think whilst we recognize there is a case for change, we have to recognize that the oil and gas industry, which clearly I represent, is also driving much of this change through its own strategic pivots to low carbon portfolios. We've seen this from many presentations of the IOCs as they reset themselves for a low carbon future. We have to make sure, though, that renewables have the right partner in the hydrocarbon sector. It's not coal, it's gas. And I think pre-COVID, there was a risk that gas has been marginalized by coal. And I'm pleased to say that during COVID, I feel that the gas debate has been restored to where it should be, that gas is back on the agenda as the natural partner for renewables. So just to conclude with a couple of points, new energy is the hot fashion, and clearly this conference is much about that. But it's important that we don't sign the obituary for the hydrocarbon sector too soon and leave the world with stranded costs and high cost energy, which is the result of not doing this in a balanced way. So the availability of energy, the economic development are tightly interlinked, and it would be reckless to allow the oil and gas sector to wither when a replacement at scale is not yet fully developed. So in summary then, we need a balanced approach to this crucial low carbon transition.
Thank you, Martin. And on the same topic of the drivers for low carbon technology innovation, we are privileged to have Esther An, She will be embarrassed when she listens that I'm going to introduce her as the Queen of Green, as she's been described by the media, but she's actually the Chief Sustainability Officer for City Developments Limited. Esther, please.
Thank you for your kind word. And well, just to give the context that the CDL is actually a developer and also a landlord, as well as a hotel owners and management operating in 29 countries and regions. And what we are very glad that is we started the sustainability journey as far back as 1995. Of course, at that time, well, very few people, or especially in our part of the world, we talk about climate change or green building. So we started the journey as with the ethos of conserving as we construct. And we have been using this, since for the past 2 decades, and green building has always been our top priority. And when you talk about green building, energy efficiency is a top priority, especially, in our industry, construction and building industry account for 36% of energy consumption worldwide, and also account for 39% of greenhouse gas emission. And we are well aware of our impact, and that also put us in a positions to drive change, not just our industry, but also the related industries, the supply chain, the value chain. And people spend about 90% indoor. So how do we engage users of buildings, whether you are home users, whether you're using the office or using hotels, using malls and F&B outlets and all that? Everyone has have an impact on the carbon footprint of our buildings. So of course, we are very supportive of the UN agency's call for 1.5 degree business ambitions. And in fact, we joined the first batch of 87 companies last year at the UN Global Compact Climate Action Week to pledge for to support the 1.5 business scenario. And then World Green Building Council has been advocating that we should aim for all new building to be net zero by 2030, and including old building by 2050. So without innovation, without innovative business practices, without resetting your business model, it is very hard for us to move the needle. And if you look at the global carbon emissions, and since Paris Agreement until end of 2019, the carbon footprint has not come down. The energy-related carbon footprint has not been, going down as what the world needed. So I think locally, Singapore is very, very hot, and and also it is estimated that Singapore is, heating up to twice as fast as other parts of the world. So how to provide thermal comforts to our building users and still maintaining reducing our carbon footprint is really a challenge. So without innovation, without technology, without renewable energy, it is actually very, very difficult. So it is also a business case that since last year, January last year, carbon tax has been introduced in Singapore. And for companies that have like global presence, we are not just looking at Singapore's carbon tax, but also globally. And thanks to COVID-19, I think the only silver lining is like it has accelerated the importance of ESG. And I can talk a little bit more about the investment perspective later on. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Esther. And finally, on the drivers for low carbon technology innovation, we have the privilege to have an expert. Professor, what's your view on the drivers of technology innovation, please?
There are many drivers. Perhaps let me highlight a few things. If you look at it clearly, again, going back to our context, remember that we are committed to the 2009, the Copenhagen Pledge. We are committed to the Paris Agreement in 2015. And being a small city, but 5.7 million people, over 700 kilometers square, but tells you a challenge. It is a highly urbanized modern city, and with no natural resources, water, minerals, no. So therefore, it tells you that we are tremendously constrained and restricted by many things, including the renewables. But given that, this is where the innovations comes in and the drivers comes in. And this is also why we need to innovate across the systems. Given that for example, we're committed to the 4% of the solar. We're committed. And we also have biomass with over 2% of the biomass to electricity. Now, and also, if you look at it that way, I think Singapore is pretty well known in turning research and technologies into challenging opportunities. And this is why early on, we talk about how we can turn water and then energy into a situations when we can create also economic growth. At the same time, we will have maintained environmental sustainability. So that gives us a context of, at the same time, how can we convince everybody, including ourselves, that we can continue to grow our economy, improve the well-being of the people. At the same time, we look after the environment. We make sure that everything we are doing is sustainable, and it's also at a reasonable cost. Now, that would be the main driver for us.
Thanks so much, Professor. And it's my pleasure to introduce Bernard Esselings. He is the President and CEO of Seneca Energy. Bernard, could you please share with us what your view on what are the potential needle movers that will facilitate the low carbon transition?
Yes, of course. Let me maybe focus on two. I think first, it's very important to have a long-term vision and a stable policy. Obviously, investment in the energy sector are long-term investment, minimum 25 years, possibly 40 years. And so I think it's important for every country to have that long-term vision and to essentially determine the energy mix that they want, and that can be different from every country, and to give that certainty and that signal to investor about what sort of energy you want. So if I take the example of Singapore, last year in SIEW 2019, Minister Johnston Singh explained that Singapore was going to rely on 4 switches, further investment on improving the gas, developing solar, developing the regional grid, as well as investing in low technology. And as a private company, Seneca, we try to be aligned with that. So if I look at gas, we've been one of the first, we were the first power generation company to import clean gas in replacement of heavy fuel oils. We were the first to switch to combined cycle technology, which is more efficient. And we continue to invest in our plant to improve the efficiency. Now, in relation to solar, because of that focus, we have expanded our portfolio to include corporate PPAs for solar energy, and also to provide renewable energy certificate to our customers. And we implemented our first solar project in 2018. On the topic of regional grid, we've also been exploring how we could leverage this to import more renewable energy and respond to the demand of our customers. And on low CO2 technologies, we are exploring what could be the next investment, whether carbon capture, whether hydrogen or biogas. And I think a very important tool in that policy is the price of carbon tax. That hasn't been maybe so much talked about, but I think it's very important because it gives a signal, and some of those technologies will not be economically viable without a price on carbon, for example, hydrogen. Now, I think the second really important driver is consumer demand, and I think that was hinted as well. And what we see is that more and more households, more and more businesses want low carbon energy. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, but also because it makes economic sense, because wind, solar have become the cheapest form of energy. And one example of that in Singapore is that there's a lot of data center companies who want to invest in Singapore, but a lot of those companies also want low CO2 energy. And the challenge for Seneca Energy, the challenge for Singapore is how are we going to provide that low CO2 energy given the limitation on renewables that we have in Singapore.
Absolutely. And certainly the International Energy Forum provides a fantastic platform to identify the needle movers. Let me invite Joe McMonigal to provide his view, please.
Well, thanks again. Let me just associate myself with the remarks that everyone made here. I couldn't agree more, and especially with Martin's sentiment that it needs to be a balanced approach. And that's one of the, I think, the advantages of the CCE platform, the carbon circular economy. By the way, I should plug there's a great website that's been produced for folks who want to learn more about it. It's called cceguide.org. It's a website that's been set up by the King Abdullah Petroleum Research Center, CAPSARC. But it's a very excellent summary of CCE. But going back to the point, I think the beauty of CCE is that different regions can utilize different parts of it. You know, it's a whole systems approach, and I think right now we've kind of been looking at this problem going after one or two of these different areas. But the CCE approach is much more comprehensive, I think. And I think by going in this type of a holistic approach, I think we have a better chance of meeting our climate goals, with the caveat that we need to do much more in terms of advancing new technologies. And until we do, we need to make sure that cleaner, affordable energy is available to power our world economy. So we'll be focusing on you know, best practices and getting the word out about some of these technologies and platforms. But it's really the entrepreneurs and the scientists that will be doing a lot of the hard work here in order for us to meet our goals.
Absolutely, thanks very much. And certainly innovation requires investments. So it's my pleasure to introduce Bon Hoe Oi, the CEO of Europort. And you have a long tradition and experience in the innovation, and the port does so. What is, in your view, how can we encourage investments to secure continuous innovation?
Okay. Very quickly, I'd like to thank EMA for allowing me to be part of this. I've learned a lot this afternoon. For all of you who may not know Jurong Port, I'll be quickly introduced. We are, apart from PSA, the other port operator in Singapore, but we handle most of the non-containerized cargo. So a lot of our cargo, for example, involves construction materials such as cement and steel. In this area of reducing carbon footprint and innovation, I have a couple of points very quickly. I'm sure there are many of us who are agreed that the technological advancements are required for us all to get towards that carbon-free future we all aspire to. But in the meantime, we all need to get to work, and we need the tools to implement whatever we may have right now to make things work. The minister spoke this morning about supply chains and how supply chains have to be reorganized in a way which would enable as low a carbon footprint as possible. So Jurong Port being the nexus of supply chains, I spoke to you earlier about construction materials. So one of the projects that we had been involved in, for example, is to reorganize the supply chain for the construction sector. Now, within the next year and a half or so, we'll be handling 1/3 of Singapore's aggregate supply through Jurong Port with the cement and the steel. All of these go towards concrete, which is the essential building material for construction in Singapore. Now, why is it important? Through this aggregation of the handling of all these construction materials at Jurong Port, we are able to reduce truck trips by up to about 700,000 per year. So this is obviously key. It is a rearrangement of the supply chain, and it's an innovation, although not necessarily technological in nature. The other thing that, of course, we would do in this concrete, ready-mix concrete industry is that we would facilitate the possibility of introduction of carbon cure technologies, which effectively, if you are familiar, could reduce the need for cement, which is also a high carbon footprint business, by up to 7%. And this reduction of the cement will actually come at a cost to Jurong Port, because we'll be handling less cement if carbon cure is effectively introduced at Jurong Port. So the point I guess I'm leading to is that at the end of the day, supply chains require innovation. Not all of them are technological in nature, but more importantly, if we want to introduce a level of incentivizing to the innovation for supply chains, then maybe policy makers should also consider the possibility of recognizing industry stewards who have no way of internalizing the gains that they help others achieve via the carbon footprint. If you look at the current policies of either carbon tax, carbon credits, any such schemes, they tend to be very individual in nature. They tend to accrue to the reduction of carbon footprint by any given emitter. But if you don't have a policy potentially that can encourage supply chain carbon footprint management, then you could be losing out more globally. So this is my thought to perhaps some of the policymakers.
Lovely, thanks so much. And can I be rude enough, Esther, to ask for your view on this topic in 30 seconds, please? Sorry, you seem to be on mute, Esther.
Okay, yeah, I mean, the past, green building and technology innovation were deemed as cost, but today definitely is innovation. And we are not looking at just today's technology, we have to continue to innovate to make sure that we meet tomorrow's need. That's why I think this tracking is very important. What gets measured get managed. If you don't know where are your gaps and you can't, to focus on area that we should improve, and innovation, technology, how to adopt digitalization, technology to help us decarbonize is very important. And we also continue to partner with, like for example, at our National University and also Sustainable Energy Research Institute, and continue our R&D and combining BIPV technology with building technology. So the whole objective is to working together to bring our carbon footprint to a level that will help advance net zero for our future.
Thanks so much, Esther. Brilliant. Bernard, same to you. Can I be rude enough to ask for your views in 30 seconds, please?
Well, maybe I'd just like to finish with an example, and it was mentioned that innovation is not only about technology, and I think one element of innovation is about partnership and partnering between startups and mature companies. And one example of Seneca Energy is we launched a peer-to-peer solar energy marketplace, SolarShare, and that's the result of a collaboration between Seneca Energy, between NG Factory, and Electrify, who is a local startup. And without the collaboration of these three, this would not have been possible. And this is more an example of business model innovation. And I think bringing the three together and creating the ecosystem for that is extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely, brilliant, thank you. And finally, to wrap it up, I would love to listen from Sadamori-san, given again the fantastic platform that he enjoys today at IEA. What's your headlines, again in 30 seconds, about what demand and supply side energy innovation we can tap on, please?
Very brief. First, the energy efficiency, driven by the kind of a digitalized automated systems. So that's the first one. Second, the electricity storage, as we'll be seeing massive amount of variable renewables, wind and solar. And we also need to electrify other sectors like transport and others. And finally, the hydrogen as a kind of a long-term, the possible energy storage carrier, but also helpful in decarbonizing hard-to-abate sectors like industries. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadamori-san. Martin, can I ask for your views, please?
Sure, very quickly. Transport. It's not just about EVs, it's also about gas transportation. Examples in India, in China, in Italy, fantastic examples of gas-powered vehicles. And finally, just a very quick word for marine transportation powered by liquefied natural gas. This is a huge area. The IEA themselves have talked about the 130 BCMA this could take out of the system. 200+ million tons of potential LNG demand if we were to convert a large number of ships.
Thank you, Martin. Bon Huy, you have the last word.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for imparting your wisdom, and I'm truly inspired and encouraged by everybody's insights. At Jurong Port, we are also extremely excited about the possibility of handling future fuels, helping with, for example, IMO 2020 and LNG bunkering as well. Indeed, I cannot think of a more exciting time for Jurong Port to be that port infrastructure that can help create that value, both landward and seaward, as I had explained earlier, and how we can bring down carbon footprint along the supply chain.
Thank you. Thank you all for your brilliant contributions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.